Good evening. Thanks for joining us. This is NTD Business, and I'm Paul Graney. The Federal Reserve wants to keep the easy money environment till further notice. What does that mean for your savings? The Fed says don't worry about inflation, and the Biden admin says 10-4. But some say the massive new spending bill is full of political waste. And an update on why a Boeing 777 engine failed. The investigation centers more on the engine maker than on Boeing. The Federal Reserve isn't worried its pandemic policies are making goods and services more expensive for everyday Americans. Well, that's what its chairman told a Senate committee today anyway. The Fed will keep interest rates low and continue buying bonds until further notice. But all of this means more dollars in this system, so how could things not get more expensive, right? But Jerome Powell says there's nothing to worry about and rejected claims the central bank's easy money policy is causing inflation and even market bubbles.
The pandemic has also left a significant imprint on inflation. Following large declines in the spring, consumer prices partially rebounded over the rest of last year. However, for some of the sectors that have been most adversely affected by the pandemic, prices remain particularly soft. Overall, on a 12-month basis, inflation remains below our 2% longer-run objective.
Powell says inflation and unemployment are still both below the Fed's goals, and that the economic recovery is uneven and far from complete. That's his words. The U.S. economy has 10 million fewer jobs now than before the pandemic, so the Fed will apparently just keep pumping money in till things get fixed. Not sure if that's going to work, but we'll see. Powell will also testify before the House Financial Services Committee on Wednesday. And Powell says don't worry, but commodity prices are rising quite rapidly. Someone's going to have to pay for that. And the market doesn't seem to share Powell's optimism either. The Fed is being forced to buy inflation-linked bonds at a pretty rapid rate. That keeps the price down artificially, but if the market didn't fear inflation, I don't think the Fed would need to intervene. Daniel Akaya wrote Escape from the Central Bank Trap. He's also the chief economist at the Tressis Hedge Fund. I asked him what the Fed's purchases mean.
Well, obviously, the Fed buying inflation-linked bonds shows that they actually see a little bit more inflation than what they probably say in their official statements. And I think that we all do, don't we? I think that we see that the prices of essential goods and services are rising faster than headline CPI, Consumer Price Index. And we're also seeing that inflation is higher for the least well off, for the poorest segments of the economy. So I think that what the Fed is trying to do there is to prevent the market from buying into inflation-linked bonds. So it continues with its financial repression activity, which is basically to take out of the market the allegedly safest assets, sovereign bonds first, mortgage-backed securities, and now inflation-linked securities, in order to force investors to take more risk and probably put more money in the more cyclical side of the asset base. No?
There are lots of people in the other camp, you could call it the deflationary camp, who say there are many deflationary forces, unemployment, technology that will help to bring costs down. How do you, as a fund manager, manage these and assess both sides?
Oh, I think both camps have a certain element of correct analysis. There are deflationary forces, high level of debt, a deflationary force, technology, obviously, the zombification of low productivity sectors and the perpetuation of overcapacity. All of those are deflationary forces, aren't they? The second, obviously, is to understand that there are important inflationary pressures that are not just being evident now, but that they were evident way before COVID-19. And those are the inflationary pressures on the essential goods and services that we actually cannot choose to stop buying or find alternatives. So healthcare, education, the non-replicable goods and services, all of these factors, they're actually rising much faster than obviously real wages and headline CPI. And therefore, as a fund manager, what we tend to do is to try to be exposed to those areas of the economy in which we see that pricing pressure as more long-term, and to avoid the traps of the ones that are more one-off, and those particularly right now, those areas of the inflation components that come from the base effect of last year, in which we see today an important rise, basically because last year was an important collapse. So those are the ones that will probably come down afterwards. But what I think that's most important is that throughout all of these years, we have seen those important elements of the core goods and services that we purchase on a day-to-day basis: fresh food, education, healthcare, insurance, and those areas, housing as well, in which inflationary pressures were actually significantly stronger than what the headline CPI and what the Fed were talking about.
Daniel, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So if we are already seeing prices go up, what will another multi-trillion-dollar spending bill do? Many fear the economy will overheat. So here's an idea. How about instead of using the money to spur the economy and risk overheating, why don't we just waste it on political projects instead? Then it's all good, right? No risk of economic overheating. Well, that's not what I'm saying is happening. That's what the Foundation for Economic Education is saying. NTD's Patrick Hayden reports.
The Foundation for Economic Education listed 10 examples Monday of wasteful spending and partisan kickbacks in President Biden's relief bill. Here they are: $1 million to advance racial justice for farmers, $50 million for environmental justice grants. This money will go to the Environmental Protection Agency. But the Republican Study Commission says the grants are thinly veiled kickbacks because much of the money will go to left-wing political groups. $112 million for the California Transit Project. This one seems completely unrelated to the virus. It will go mostly towards an underground rail project in Silicon Valley. $10 million to preserve Native American languages. $750 million for global health. This money will go to the CDC to fund global health programs and vaccination efforts in other countries. Other non-virus related handouts include $200 million for museum and library services, $750 million for Native American housing, expansion of Obamacare subsidies, billions for public schools whether they reopen or not, and countless pet projects for powerful lawmakers. The article's author claims wasteful spending is just par for the course with big government. His solution? Just make it smaller. Patrick Hayden, NTD News.
David Ditch over at the Heritage Foundation feels the same way. I talked to him earlier and asked, what's a better route for the Biden admin to take?
The risk is that we are adding another huge amount of money, about $14,000 per household, to the national debt, which already stands at over $215,000 per household. It's an amount of money that, frankly, very rarely gets reported on, almost never gets mentioned by our elected officials. And right now, we can look at, for example, the rise in long-term interest rates on the federal debt, which has tripled in the last few months. A lot of financial analysts are starting to wake up to the fact that U.S. debt is no longer a permanent risk-free investment. And when more and more investors, both here and abroad, start to realize that they might be overexposed to U.S. debt, they're going to start to demand higher interest rates on the debt. And when the debt is as large as it is now, and expected to get larger with each passing year, small, even tiny increases in interest rates will have disastrously huge costs.
So what do you think would have been a better route for the Biden administration to go?
I think a much smaller package focused on public health spending, maybe extending the length of unemployment insurance claims, extending some loan programs, you could spend closer to $300 to $500 billion and get the vast majority of the economic impact that you would want out of a package like this, while spending a fraction as much.
Something more targeted. And do you think that a lot of this package, is it political? Is there political motives behind it?
I think it's heavily political. For example, there's $350 billion to state and local governments when they've lost a fraction as much. They already received more aid from the federal government last year than they lost in tax revenue. There's $90 billion being spent on bailing out private sector union pension plans, which has absolutely nothing to do with the COVID crisis. You've got $170 billion being sent to K through 12 and universities for reopening, even though most of that money isn't even going to be spent this year.
Wow, they're incredible figures. And so obviously it looks like it'll get passed. It doesn't seem to, they're going to do this budget reconciliation style technique, doesn't even need the support of the Republicans, right?
Honestly, I don't think that it's baked in yet. One of the big factors is the minimum wage. Senators Manchin and Sinema of Arizona have already said that they think a $15 an hour minimum wage is too high. Senator Manchin has made comments that he isn't particularly comfortable with passing legislation of this magnitude on a purely partisan basis. It remains to be seen whether the Senate is going to let this sail through. And we also don't know what sections of the bill might be ruled out of bounds by the Senate parliamentarian.
Interesting. It'll be a test for the partisan politics we've got so used to watching. Mr. Ditch, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Opponents to a minimum wage say it hurts low-income workers because business owners will be forced to lay many off or just automate away their jobs. Many small businesses run pretty tight profit margins, you know. Like Mr. Ditch just mentioned, Democrat Senator Manchin is against the $15 minimum wage for that very reason. But just today, he said he'd support an $11 minimum. NTD's Tom Ozimek reports.
Democrat Senator Joe Manchin wants to amend the stimulus bill to mandate an $11 federal minimum wage. That's down from President Biden's proposed $15 an hour. Democrats are trying to push the bill through a process called budget reconciliation. That means they won't need Republican support, but they will need Manchin's vote, and he's against the $15 an hour hike. He says $11 would be better for his home state of West Virginia. A recent study by the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office found that increasing the minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2025 would cost 1.4 million jobs. The office didn't study an $11 option, but it found that an increase to $12 would result in the loss of 300,000 jobs. It's still unclear whether Senate rules will allow minimum wage provisions into the relief bill under budget reconciliation procedures. The Senate parliamentarian will rule on whether it's allowed. She's the official advisor on procedural matters. Both Democrats and Republicans are expected to meet with her on Wednesday to argue their cases. She's expected to rule on it soon after. Tom Ozimek, NTD News.
Bitcoin plummeted today. It took shares of Tesla along for the ride. Pardon the pun. Are investors worried about the car maker's exposure to the coin? Conway G. Gittins has the details.
A big drop in the price of Bitcoin Tuesday is fueling fears a recent buying frenzy had pushed the value of the notoriously volatile asset far beyond where it should be. The world's biggest cryptocurrency was in the throes of its biggest daily plunge in a month, sparking the liquidation of leveraged bets and a sell-off across the cryptocurrency world. Tesla was also caught up in the whirlwind as the plummet in Bitcoin takes the shine off of Tesla's recent $1.5 billion Bitcoin investment. With that gamble now worth much less, the stock is under pressure, erasing all of its gains for the year, shaving off more than $110 billion of market value and some $20 billion from CEO Elon Musk's net worth. Nerves have gotten the best of Bitcoin buyers since it hit a record high on Sunday of more than $58,000. Since then, it has lost over 20% of its value, trading at one point at about $46,000 on Tuesday. Rising government bond yields have recently knocked the wind out of riskier assets on Wall Street, and Bitcoin is one of the riskiest of them all.
And payments firm Square said today it purchased about $170 million worth of Bitcoin. Keep you updated. We have an update on the Boeing engine failure incident. Dramatic. An investigation agency says metal fatigue may have caused damage to the engine's fan blade. Emily Wyther reports.
A preliminary assessment has found signs of metal fatigue on the engine that failed on a United Airlines Boeing 777 flight at the weekend. The engine failed with a loud bang 4 minutes after takeoff from Denver. The National Transport Safety Board have been looking at damage to a fan blade. The chairman of the U.S. Air Accident Investigator told reporters it remains unclear whether the incident is consistent with an engine failure on a different Hawaiian-bound United flight in February 2018. That failure was attributed to a fatigue fracture in a fan blade. The engine that failed shed parts over a Denver suburb. The Pratt & Whitney engine, the PW4000, is used on 128 planes, or less than 10% of the global fleet. In another incident on Japan Airlines in December 2020, the country's Transport Safety Board reported it found 2 damaged fan blades, one with a metal fatigue crack on the same engine. That investigation is ongoing. The focus is more on engine maker Pratt, and analysts expect little financial impact on Boeing. But the PW4000 issues are a fresh headache for the plane maker, which saw its flagship 737 MAX grounded for nearly 2 years after 2 deadly crashes. Investigators will continue to examine the United engine's fan blade on Tuesday.
Never a dull day for Boeing. Still to come. The IRS extends the tax deadline for Texas. It'll impact all residents and businesses in the state, along with others affected by the recent extreme weather. And 2 California state lawmakers take on the oil and gas industry. They want to completely ban fracking in the state by 2027. That and more after the break.
유치원 폐쇄 명령서입니다.
전 폐쇄 명령 받아들일 수 없습니다.
유치원 폐쇄 명령이라.
좀 들어간 건 어떻게 됐어? 도저히 방법이 없대?
정일도 사장님을 대신해서 제가 대신 말씀드리면 안 되겠습니까?
You know nothing about China.
Man, this is getting really out of control.
You might never be able to go back to China.
I have to take that risk. If I don't do it, who will?
The IRS is extending the tax deadline for Texas because of the recent winter storms. Texans now have until June 15th to file personal and business taxes and make their payments. It's not just for Texas. If FEMA issued a disaster declaration in your state, your deadline is also extended. All relief workers and anyone who was injured or killed in the disaster area can also get the extension. For information, visit the IRS website or talk to a tax professional. 2 California state lawmakers want to ban fracking in the state over the next few years. They also want to make sure oil and gas wells are far away from homes and other public places. NTD's David Zhang reports.
California State Senators Scott Wiener and Monique Limon are taking on the oil and gas industry. They recently introduced a bill to stop issuing new fracking permits starting next year, and it would ban fracking altogether by 2027. Fracking is a way to extract oil and gas from rocks deep below the ground's surface. Environmental groups claim it threatens public health and hurts the environment. If passed, the bill would also prevent wells from operating within 2,500 feet of homes or other public places. The bill also includes provisions to help well-paid union workers in the fossil fuel industry transition to other types of jobs. But it's facing pushback from the industry. The president of the Western State Petroleum Association, Catherine Rehas Boyd, warned that dismantling California's oil and natural gas industry right now would require betting everything on alternative energy resources that we don't have in place and a supporting infrastructure that's far from being at the scale we need. California is the 7th largest crude oil producer in the United States. It accounted for about 4% of crude oil production in 2019. David Zhang, NTD News, California.
Facebook Refriends Australia. The government made some changes to its media laws, and are other countries now taking note? And good news for theme park lovers. Six Flags is reopening all its locations this season. That and more in just a minute.
When you look at TV networks in America, a soundbite and fight-it-out culture prevails on news and commentary programs. As a Canadian, I'm fascinated with America, and I wanted to offer American thought leaders an opportunity to share their thoughts in a deep dive format, where we can explore their ideas together. And so American Thought Leaders was born. The world's most brilliant thinkers believed that open discourse was the key to greatness. However, all around the world, we see that discourse is being stifled, and political agendas have subverted media. The Epoch Times launched its Global Thought Leaders program to bring back this great tradition of free thought. As the host of American Thought Leaders, every week I interview some of the most intriguing minds on the most pressing issues of our time. Be sure to check out our new episodes every week.
Australian news will be back on Facebook. Don't worry, Australians. The tech giant has reached an agreement with the Australian government over a proposed media law.
Well, Facebook has refriended Australia, and Australian news will be restored to the Facebook platform. And Facebook has committed to entering into good faith negotiations with Australian news media businesses in seeking to reach agreements to pay for content.
The two have been in a tense standoff over paying for news content. With the deal, Facebook will restore Australian news pages on its platform, and tech companies will have 2 months to reach private deals for news content before the government intervenes. World leaders have been watching the negotiations closely. Countries like Canada and Britain are considering similar laws. Big tech. Theme park giant Six Flags says it plans to open all 26 of its amusement and water parks this season. That includes 5 that couldn't operate last year because of the virus. Six Flags says it worked with health experts to develop a safe reopening plan. One safety measure is taking to require reservations and limit the number of people in its parks. All workers and guests will have to wear masks, get temperature checks, and will also encourage social distancing on rides, in lines, and in other areas, including seating areas. Many of the parks are set to open in the next few weeks. And get ready to savor the sights and sounds of the red planet. This is the first footage from the Perseverance, NASA's newly landed rover on Mars. Multiple cameras on board captured the chute deploying and the heat shield dropping before the rover touched down in a cloud of red Martian dust to thunderous cheers from Mission Control. Brian Woods reports.
I invite you now to, if you would like to close your eyes and just imagine yourself sitting on the surface of Mars and listening to the surroundings.
NASA scientists on Monday released the first sights and sounds ever recorded on Mars, a light gust of wind on the planet's surface. Vivid footage showed the rover Perseverance deploying its red and white supersonic parachute by way of a rocket-powered hovercraft and lowering its wheels to the ground in a plume of dust and smoke.
Ready to begin seeking the signs of past life.
The project's lead engineer described watching the most advanced rover ever developed take its place on Mars.
It gives me goosebumps every time I see it. Just amazing. I hope everybody kept their hands and arms inside the vehicle at all times while it was in motion.
So we're actually beginning to...
The footage was captured last Thursday from cameras mounted at different angles of the Perseverance landing craft, as it passed through the planet's thin atmosphere to gently touch down inside a basin called the Jezero crater. The six-wheeled vehicle sailed through space for almost 7 months. The video montage was presented to reporters 4 days after the historic landing. The chief imaging scientist behind the project explains what's presented.
This is it. This is Mars. We're here in our place that we're going to be exploring over the next months and coming years.
Scientists hope to extract samples from Martian rock for future analysis back on Earth, the first such specimens ever collected by humankind from another planet.
That's the latest business updates for today. You can still catch NTD Evening News with Stephanie Cox at 6:30 p.m. Eastern. For NTD Business, that's all for today. Thank you for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.
Don't let YouTube decide what information you get. That's your choice. YouTube is deleting our videos and cuts you off from a source of honest reporting. Make sure you don't lose access to NTD's news content, and take a quick moment to subscribe to our newsletter so no matter what happens here, you'll keep your access to a trustworthy news source.